I believe that in situations like this, where we have a country where there's been a lot of conflict for many, many years, the leader at the helm of affairs has to be optimistic, and you have to explore all the alternatives and all the options you have available to you. So yes, a lot of people would fault Hamdok for taking the deal in November, but for me, I would say that maybe we cut him some slack and say that probably he was being overly optimistic at this point, with benefits of hindsight, to say that he was overly optimistic with him accepting the deal, saying that he wanted the government to be run the way it was. But him now resigning months after is him looking at it saying that, you know what, I may have been wrong, I may have over-leveraged my optimism, and I may have expected too much, that this may not have a way forward per se. But we must keep insisting that dialogue must continue in Sudan as a way forward, because either we like it or not, the only way forward right now out of these waves of military rule that we're having back in Africa right now is democratic civilian rule. Because somehow, unfortunately, in the last 2 to 3 years, we've had a huge wave of coups come into play, and either we like it or not, once it seems to be the new trend and it goes unchecked, it will keep spiraling into other nations, and they will keep saying that it becomes the order of the day, and then we have the entire continent being dragged back 2 to 3 decades back to where we were before.
Now, I would like to stay with you, Dipo. Are we being too optimistic? Because you're talking about a country that has never had a civilian rule in its existence. Omar al-Bashir was there for decades. You also look at Guinea. The first democratic election only happened in 2010 after elections. So democracy is a strange system of government to these countries, and lots of them are still suffering from the effects of hangover for military rule. Are we being too optimistic, or just because the West wants democracy? Are we forcing democracy on these countries, or should we just allow them to evolve and find their own natural system of government? What suits the people of Sudan?
That's a fantastic question. Personally, I'm all for any system of government that moves people forward. Okay, either it's military, either it's a monarchy, either it's democracy, either it's parliamentary. As long as the lives of the people are moving forward, and then there is some semblance of improvement. What we have seen so far with the military rule in Sudan over the last couple of years, year in, year out, there hasn't been much improvement in the lives of the people. So now we're saying that, can we try something else? Can we try democracy? Because obviously tyranny hasn't been working. The military rule hasn't been working. The poverty line keeps getting lower and lower. There's a lot of suffering. There's a lot of violence. So we're saying that, can we try something new? Like I said earlier, I'm for anything that moves the people forward, because in the end, that is the core responsibility of government. That's the core responsibility of any form of leadership in any organization or in any nation, moving the people forward from where they are to where they ought to be. But so far, what we're seeing so far in Sudan hasn't indicated that there's any plan whatsoever from the side of the military to move the people forward in any positive direction. So that's where we're saying, okay, so can we at least try democracy? Because we have seen democracy as a model work in different parts of the world, even in some parts of Africa as well. So yes, we're suggesting that democracy happen, that it be the new system of government there in Sudan, even though it may be new to them. But this much I would say, there's a saying that it is when you wake up that it is morning. Now, we can't say that for the last couple of years or decades that they've been under military rule, that they shouldn't try civilian rule. Yes, it has been that for them, but can they try something new to see if they will have new results? It was quite unfortunate that Prime Minister Hamdok had to resign, but I mean, he had to cave under the pressure, because from where he was sitting, it was obvious at the time that there was no way forward. But does that mean that they give up? No, they need to take another run at it to see how these things will work.
All right, I'm liking your spirit of optimism, Leonard, but we'll get back to this. Leonard and Dipo will go for a quick break, and when we come back, we'll be delving into situations in Mali. Don't go anywhere.
My name is Nadia Nakai, and I'm a rapper that originates from South Africa.
Yo, my name is Deliver Julio. Let's live together with the B2C soldiers. Kampala boys from Uganda.
Alors je souhaite
Bonne année.
We are Tara and Bella.
My name is Loco.
Shout out News Central.
À la chaîne News Central. News Central, Africa first.
Africa first.
Keep watching News Central Africa first.
This is the beginning of a movement, a time that marks a turning point in African broadcasting. We refuse to be held back. We are taking our stories and sharing them in our voices. The world will hear Africa's true voice and follow her authentic story. Join us right here on NewsCentraltv as we make history by telling stories that put Africa first.
Welcome back. If you just joined us, you're on to the conversation where we're discussing political stories on the African continent. And just before we went on the break, we talked about the political situations in Sudan. And our guest with us talked about optimism, despite the fact of so much tyranny, authoritarianism, government in Sudan, and even the resignation of the Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok. The people are still hoping for true democracy in Sudan. We still have with us Dikpo Yewole and Mbule Zige Leonard on the conversation, and we move over to Mali, where unfortunately the situation is the same, and the transition to civilian rule in Mali is looking shaky. In 2020, following a coup, a military-civilian interim government agreed an 18-month timetable that should end with elections in February 2022. In May 2021, the leader of the first coup, Colonel Assimi Goïta, staged a second coup and appointed himself as interim president. Mali was supposed to hold the elections in February, but the military-led government has pushed that back by up to 5 years. And here is what the UN has to say.
En tout cas, c'est ma lecture. C'est pas un procès impliquant beaucoup d'acteurs. Et j'estime que dans notre analyse, nous devrons aussi intégrer cela, et j'appelle à la sagesse de la société civile, des autres acteurs, pour éviter qu'un pays comme le Burkina, qui est cité comme exemple sur un certain nombre de choses, ne puisse pas retomber dans une crise comme ce qui se passe ailleurs.
Now, Leonard, were you surprised by the announcement and the boldness to extend the transition period by 5 years, as announced by Colonel Assimi Goïta, and how has this been viewed in Mali itself?
Not surprised at all, because what you have with the current Mali situation is that first and foremost, you can see was a rejection of the ECOWAS standpoint, whereby ECOWAS wanted the Malian transition body to have elections in the space of 6 months. That would have been in February. And looking at the long-standing issues that have befallen Mali ever since the coup of 2012 till now, going to elections would just be repeating. It would be basically repeating these mistakes that have been done in the past, because in 2013, you had the interim government, and then you had the French intervention, which at least enabled Malian government to have control of a large part of the territory of the country. And then subsequently, you had former President Keita, who came to power. However, he came into power, and then there was issues that he met when he came to power were not resolved. And that's what led to the coup. And, you know, some of these issues pertain to political corruption, the inability to solve Mali's recurring security issues, the inability to improve the socioeconomic well-being of Malian citizens. And with ECOWAS and the international community, they're basically saying that, you know what, just bring in a new leader and then they'll come and handle those things. But then the way that the military transition body is approaching it is that, no, we can't keep using the same approach to the same problems. Give us a bit more time, and then from there we'll be able to see how we can take a different approach to these long-standing issues. Because even though the first military coup occurred in 2012, some of the issues pertaining to, for example, the issue of the Tuaregs, they've been long-standing since the 1960s. Even during the 20-year period where Mali established itself as one of the most consolidated democracies on the continent, there were a lot of issues pertaining to poor governance, the non-presence of the state administration across the country. And that's one of the reasons that led to the infiltration of jihadists, the failure to put in place an economic system which enables Malians to improve their livelihood. So the ECOWAS standpoint of just putting in place, of organizing elections, would probably just create a scenario which leads to another coup, and that could also have problems with respect to the rest of the region, as we already see at this point in time.
All right, Leonard, you're saying the time is too short, 6 months, and that's why you're of the opinion that 5 years is okay. But Dikpo, do you believe that 5 years is okay? Do you believe that 6 months is too short?
I believe 5 years is too long, and I don't believe 6 years is too short. If we cast our mind back to August of 2020, when the first coup happened, and then there was a lot of backlash from the international community, the AU, ECOWAS, everyone. I find it quite interesting when you say that there was an agreement for 18 months. If we remember correctly, what happened was when the coup happened, and then there was so much condemnation, it was the people that came into power by the coup that then suggested, saying that, okay, you know what, we didn't come to power to seize power and then stay here indefinitely. We're open to having a conversation around returning the government back to civilian rule in 18 months, which for them at the time was strategic, and it somewhat gave them some form of legitimacy with the people, because they came into the entire system saying that they were there at the behest of the people, and then they had support of the people as well. So they had to do that strategically to say that, you know what, in 18 months, we're not here to seize power, but in 18 months, we're open to returning power back to civilian rule. So the question is, if they had made that statement or come to that agreement, as you say, in good faith in the first place, there would have been preparations from then up until now, because ideally elections were supposed to hold next February.
All right, Dikpo,
which is next month.
Sorry to butt in there now. You're saying 5 years is too long, but if you look at it, we know that there was actually a meeting of the national consultation process where they had an option of 5 months to 5 years, and the military chose 5 years. So do you think that this transition period which the military has chosen was lent credence to the consultation, because they gave an option to the military? You said 5 months or 5 years, and the military chose 5 years. So do we blame the military for choosing 5 years at this point in time?
Well, we can't blame them, because in the end, like you said, it's the option they were given. But that being said, that option shouldn't have been on the table, because 5 years for me is too long. Either we like it or not, a lot can happen in 5 years. They get to consolidate their authority, their power in 5 years. And who says that we won't end up having the same conversation in 5 years? So for me, I mean, anyone would have asked, they wouldn't have chosen 5 months. Let's be realistic. They have been in power for like 17 months now, and they have seen what it is to be in power and to be in charge of a nation. They have seen the benefits, they have seen the financial side of it, and every other side of it. Everybody in that situation would not want to relinquish power. So giving them the alternative of 5 years, for me, was a huge mistake. And I don't think that they will have chosen the 5 months in the first place. But that being said, I'll still go back to how the entire thing started and how it wasn't done in good faith, and how it was a bit too optimistic for us to assume that they were going to allow elections hold in 18 months. I expected it to happen much longer than 18 months, because they did that strategically at the time to have a semblance of doing the will of the people.
Now, I'd like to bring in Leonard here. If you know the geography and the current security situation in Mali, you would understand that the security situation is not conducive for elections at the moment. You have Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, you have Islamic State West African province holding vast swaths of Malian territory. And then you have ECOWAS, an African Union with the international community, applying pressure to the military junta in Mali to hold elections. In your opinion, the security situation in Mali right now, as we speak, is it conducive for elections to hold at the moment?
Well, first and foremost, a point of correction. I didn't support the idea of them holding the transition for 5 years. I just said I was not surprised. I believe that maybe the 5 year period is a lot, but then at the same time, it can be used as leverage. They might not exhaust that period. Now, before I get into, to better answer the question, one thing you need to understand is that the nature of the coup, just like you have different forms of democracy, you have different types of military coups. What you had, for instance, in Sudan was an institutional coup, whereby the military officials were trying as much as possible to preserve the status quo before a civilian transition could really take hold. What you had, on the other hand, in Mali was you had a rejection of incumbents, whereby, as you said, you had leaders, democratically elected civilian leaders, who have been unable to resolve the prevailing problems. And they were accentuated, for example, by rigged elections in 2020, and the inability for the leaders to really step up and own up to these shortcomings they had. And as a result, that led to the coup. And one of the major issues was security. Mali is not in a position at present to be able to hold free and fair elections, which would enable as many participants as possible, because they're parts of the country which are literally littered with all types of armed groups. You talk about jihadists, but you also have, in addition to the jihadists, you also have self-defense groups, some of them which are beyond the scope of government control. You have such a large proliferation of arms. And then you add to the fact that you have the French Operation Barkhane, which have been in place since 2013. They're doing a slow withdrawal right now. And now that reconfiguration of the security apparatus requires that the government, the military government in place, to try and see how they can fill in the gap that the French are leaving, because the French have more or less been the security guarantors for Mali for the most part since 2013. In fact, the reason they came in was because the country was going to fall to the jihadists, because the Malian army didn't have that capacity. So it is very important that while we do understand the need for a civilian government to be in power, the very issues that have befallen the previous civilian regimes and which are currently trying to be addressed by the military regime, if they aren't properly addressed, then you have a scenario where Mali could collapse. It could fall into the hands of the jihadists, and that could spell trouble for the whole region.
There's a lot of security concerns going on there in Mali. Now we have security threatening Mali in the midst of political instability. We also have the opposition now, because while the military went for a 5 years break to conduct an election, opposition parties in Mali have also said that they are not up for it. Meanwhile, ECOWAS has issued Mali and Guinea with a lot of sanctions. Well, we'll go for a quick break now. We'll be right back with the conversation. We'll get to know what exactly is happening on the political scene in Chad. Stay tuned.
As reporters, we don't just gather news stories, we experience them daily. So join us on Report Desk Africa as we share these experiences and review the top African stories every Thursday at 5:30 p.m. West African time, only on News Central.
Welcome back to the conversation, and we're still discussing transitions and elections projections for 2022. Now, the Middle East moved us to Chad. In April of 2021, it brought presidential elections in Chad. Incumbent President Idris Deby, who served for 5 consecutive terms since seizing power in the 1990s through a coup d'etat, won a 6th presidential term. His election was unfortunately short-lived as he died in battle, and his son, Mohamed Deby Itno, took over the reins of power in his country. Now, let me come to you, Dipo. A lot of criticisms trailed the taking over of power from Idris Deby by his son, Mohamed. They said constitutionally it was illegal and that Chad is not a monarchy. Now, he has announced he did announce an 18-month transitional period there. And we've seen some form of similarities with Mali and what happens when people plan coups in Sudan. They never stick to those transition periods. Are you optimistic that this 18-month transition period that Mohammed Idris Deby Itno announced will be adhered to?
No, I am not. In any way possible, I am not. And don't you find it interesting that he also said 18 months? So you see why I said...
Is there a cliche with 18 months there?
Yes. So there's a playbook here that we have to recognize that they're being strategic. Because, I mean, this is 2022. All this happened in 2021. I think it would have been quite reckless for you to come into power that way and then not make a statement or not appear to be for a transitional government. It was just pure strategy. And that's why he said, okay, you know what, in 18 months, we'll transition back into civilian rule, even though I don't see that happening. But that being said, we only can keep our fingers crossed. Maybe we can also have some form of optimism, but I am not quite optimistic that they will stick to that timetable of 18 months because I see them pushing it further. And that's why I'm very concerned with the issue with Mali, because either we like it or not, certain things happen in certain places and they always set a precedence. Chad to Mali, they're not quite far from each other. They're practically neighbors. So we need to be very careful with how all these issues are being handled and how they can always spiral into other parts of the continent as well. So that's why, for me, I was saying that the whole conversation with Mali and 5 years was too long, because either we like it or not, we will be setting a precedence somewhere, somehow, that it is okay for you to seize power somewhere, and then the day after a lot of condemnation, say that, you know what, I'm not power grabbing, I'm only here to ensure that the government is stable, and in 18 months, I'll be handing over to another government. That, for me, has now become a playbook, and I think that we know better, and there is a lot that needs to be done on the face of the continent with regards to having coups and these pseudo-transitional governments being in power.
Okay, Dikpo, earlier on, I would have called you a man of optimism, but right now you're beginning to change sway. So let's go to Leonard now. Let's talk about the will of the people. Now, Dikpo has said he's not so optimistic that the son, that's Itno Deby, will actually go ahead with the 18-month transition.